Perhaps one of the biggest questions and the most frequent questions that I get asked is ROI important in a learning context? There are definitely two schools of thought here about return on investment calculations and whether or not and how much one should spend of resources and time to address the return on investment question. I've given a lot of thought from a finance background, which I come from, to that over the years, because my instinct is to say it must be important, because every investment should be quantified in terms of and evaluated in terms of its outputs and outcomes. So I philosophically start from a position that says ROI is very important. And the difficulty that managers, L&D managers have is being able to assess it correctly. Perhaps the world expert on that is Jack Phillips, and his book, The Value of Learning, is perhaps one that most heads of learning would have read or come across or at least should do, because it has got an awful lot of useful information in there about return on investment. And in that book, he obviously, Jack deals with the Kirkpatrick model to some length. Kirkpatrick, as all heads of learning will know, was the originator of the concept that there are 4 levels of return on investment calculation that can be achieved, or 4 levels of evaluation, I should say, that can be achieved. The easiest one is post-course feedback. Happy sheets is the common parlance for that. And our research shows that 94% of training includes some form of happy sheet post-course feedback. What does that do? Well, actually, it is a social statement of the learner to the trainer. It really is an indicator of what they thought of the trainer. It doesn't have any great impact or import in terms of, was that learning effective? It doesn't measure that or seek to measure that. It's, did I like it? Did I enjoy it? Was it a good experience? So in terms of genuine return on investment is very limited benefit. But it's easy to do, and that's why 94% of organisations are doing it. The second one is testing the learning effectiveness during the actual training itself. During the training and then after the training, testing what was being learned by the learners in that environment. That's Kirkpatrick level 2. And something like 15% of organisations in their training programs have that as a standard. They do want their learners to be shown to be learning and provably learning by testing. Very good, very good. But in itself, it doesn't mean that the learning is being transferred back to the job, does it? It's what's going on actually in the training course. The third level of Kirkpatrick is application to the workplace. So what that involves is rather more difficult for training managers and L&D managers to actually implement, because what that requires is pre-course, pre-training assessment of competence, and then sometime after the learning has taken place, equivalent assessment evaluation post-course of the improvement in performance that is taken place by virtue of that learning. That isn't that easy to do, because there are a number of factors can get in the way between A and B. Has there been any changes, other changes in the workplace that may have led that person to improve their skills, other than that training course? So it's not particularly easy to do. It's also quite time-consuming, because you have to do the pre-course assessment followed by post-course assessment, usually involving the support of line managers. So line managers, remember we've spoken before about learning transfer systems and the need for managers to be involved in the process. Well, you can't evaluate the effectiveness of that learning unless those managers are involved in the process before and after. Not effectively. Training managers can try and do it on their own, but without the support of line managers, it doesn't work. So Kirkpatrick Level 3, in my judgment, is by far the best level at which training manager, most pragmatic level that managers can aspire to achieve and ought to be aspiring to achieve for virtually every learning event. Now, of course, there are certain areas like induction training and so forth where possibly, that isn't pragmatic and practical. But for most training programs, Kirkpatrick Level 3 is achievable. But it's achievable with effort, and it doesn't sit that easily, doesn't come that easily. You need to have a robust learner feedback service and or system to do that. And that's something that we developed over the years to enable our clients to achieve Kirkpatrick Level 3. Very happy to discuss that with anybody that wants to do so. And then you move from that to Kirkpatrick Level 4, which Jack in his book espouses as the highest level of evaluation and return on investment. However, in the book, it makes the point that this is really only pragmatically possible for major rollouts. And what does it mean? Level 4 is the impact of the learning to the business results. And there's a big gap, there's a big journey to go from any learning event to business results. And a lot of variables can get in the way in between. And so my feeling about that, and Jack Phillips' feeling also, is that you would only countenance that if you were involved in a major change program that was going to affect the entire business. You would then want to know how that training program and all the events that you were involving yourself in to make that change, how they were panning out in terms of business results, wouldn't you? But it would have to be something that was of that ilk. So going back to the level 3 application to the workplace, sometimes managers have said to me, they don't try to do that. And in fact, what we believe is only something like 4 to 5% of training managers are seeking to do that today. And I think because of that, they are denigrating their own efforts with their senior team because their senior management want to see that. That's the measurement they want to see. So if you're not doing that, you're not doing yourself much of a service in terms of elevating your function and getting more training budget next year, are you? So it's something that ought to be tried to be done. When you look at return on investment as a calculation, there are clearly two dimensions. There's the return and there's the investment cost. What is the cost of putting on that learning event? Now, here's an interesting point. I found this interesting to talk to people and get their understanding of this. Not many managers, training managers, understand this dynamic, this cost equation. If I say to you as a training manager, what's the cost of you employing one of your trainers? And I've asked this question to many, many training managers. And they immediately think about the salary cost. They think about the NI, the pension, the other associated salary costs of that individual. So they might say, well, that if we add it all together, that comes to around 40,000, for argument's sake. Every company is different, of course. And then you say, well, okay, what about the overhead recovery rate that you will need to achieve on that cost for your business model to function properly? They say, what do you mean? And I say, well, office space, rent, rates, heat, light, telephone, all the cost of a business, your central functions, all the central functions that you have, those are costs that must be met by everyone in the business, and usually that is recovered as a percentage of your direct salary cost. So if you say that your direct salary cost of a trainer is 40,000, I will say to you that in most cases that means that the indirect overhead recovery plus the associated profits of the business that needs to be made equates to that 100%, another 40,000. And they say, oh yes, I see what you mean. So what you're saying is, they say, that the true cost of employing a trainer is 80,000 a year. And I say, no, it isn't. And they say, well, what else is there? So you say, well, what you tell me, what are the other costs associated with employing a trainer? And very, very few will think further than that. They don't get that financial implication of employing a trainer and running a training function. until you say to them, what about the lost opportunity cost of all the delegates that are going to be attending that trainer's training sessions on a yearly basis? And then suddenly they get it. Oh, I see. Are you saying? I say, yes. So we then go through a little procedure. We say, how many training days a year, on average, is one of your trainers training? And they often come up with something like 140, 150, maybe more, maybe less. Let's say 140, all right? And then you say, how many delegates would they be having in the room on average per day when they're training, on a training day? And perhaps the average is 10. So now you say, well, okay, 140 days times 10, 1,400 man days of your company's resource, of their time, your employees' time, is going to be allocated to that trainer's effectiveness. And they're going to be subject to the learning effectiveness and the skills of your trainer in the course of a year. I said, now, your average payroll cost is X. Let's work that out then. You've got 1,400 man days. That's roughly 6 people full time. So if your average payroll cost is 30,000 a person, or overall your company, 6 of those is 180,000. Plus the 80 is now 260,000. So the genuine cost of employing a trainer is $250,000 a year, isn't it? And interestingly, in Jack Phillips' book, he gives a case study of an American city where they actually calculated that the true cost in this kind of approach is 6 times the direct salary cost of the trainer, which is almost exactly what we've just said here. 260 is 6.5 times 40,000, isn't it? So these numbers stack up. Now, when you appreciate that as a training manager, that you are being entrusted with significant resources by your organisation, isn't there then a pressure on you to show that that's effectively being used? And that is why return on investment is very, very important, but only pragmatically. It must be done pragmatically. And level 3, Kirkpatrick, is the pragmatic approach for most organisations, for most cases.